Hi, everyone, and welcome to God's Plan, Your Part, a podcast where our goal is to read the entire Bible in a year, seeking to understand God's plan of redemption while discovering daily and practically your part in it. Have you ever found yourself in a place of compromise? Today's passages in Galatians 4, 5, and 6 talk about just that. So we're going to dive into Galatians 4, 5, 6 today and talk a little bit about how we have come into situations of compromise, especially in our world today. It can't be any more clear that we have compromised our blessings and what the fruits of the Spirit have given to us for the things of the flesh. So we're going to talk about that today. Ryan's going to tap into a little bit more of kind of this comparison, this word picture with Sarah and Hagar that kind of deal with the same things. We'll get into my original question later on in the episode.
So I think what's really interesting to me in Galatians 4, and we'll get into more of what you were kind of alluding to after Galatians 4, the whole debate that's raging in the book of Galatians is, should we come under the law, basically? And the law is the law of Moses, the Ten Commandments, but even more, that expanded law. The Pharisees have really expanded that law. And the question is it enough just to believe in Jesus, or do we need to believe in Jesus and do a few other things? And this radical message that Paul is preaching is, no, you just believe in Jesus.
I have a quick question. So you say all of these things that Pharisees have added. This would have been that like 400 years of silence. Is that like them just kind of going on like steroids to try to figure out how they can be more holy? Is that a thing? Because I feel like that correlates.
They took the law so seriously, they did not want to like even get close to breaking the law, that they made like additional laws to make sure you didn't get close enough. So actually,
so for instance, like rest on the Sabbath would have looked like don't do this and don't do this and don't do this and don't do this. Correct. So it was like there's one strand and then they added like 50 articles to each one.
So it's bending over backwards to make sure you don't even get close to breaking the law. And they have the whole thing wrong. That's never what God intended. God intended that we would have the law to give us a guideline to honor him through faith. And that's actually the case that Paul's going to make, which sets us up for Galatians 4 really well. Paul's going to talk about Ishmael, the son of Hagar, and Isaac, the son of Sarah. And they both kind of represent, he says he's using it as an allegory, they both represent different ways of relating to God. So he says that Ishmael is the son of the law, the son of the slave. And the idea is God told Abram that he would have a son. God promised that he would have a son. And time passes and Abram and Sarah are not having a son, so they decide, well, maybe we should do this on our own. Maybe we should figure out a way to help God so that God can accomplish what he wants by our own scheming. And so Abram sleeps with Hagar, the servant to Sarah, and they have a son, Ishmael, but that's never what God intended. And so Ishmael is not the son of the promise. He's the son of man's planning and scheming. And Isaac, eventually, Sarah becomes pregnant, and they have Isaac, who is the son of the promise that God intended. So Paul is saying, hey, don't be a son of human scheming. Don't be a son of the law that is a son of a slave. You're a slave to the law that will not honor God. And God ultimately said, hey, Ishmael, I like you and everything. I'm going to take care of you, but you're not it. The law is not it.
I have a question about that too. So is this letter, is this to the Gentiles, or is this to the Jews, or is it kind of a mix of both? This is why I'm asking, is because if it's to the Gentiles, is this like the Gentiles are kind of like catching up and like making up for lost time of things that they didn't know before? Or is this for Jews who are part of the new Christian church that can't let go of the past?
So it's actually to both. And it's part of this huge conflict that we talked about in Acts 15. It's part of the conflict we talked about in the book of James. Gentiles are coming to know Jesus. They're coming to faith. And they have right relationship with God immediately through faith in Jesus.
Right.
And Jews are coming to Christ through faith in Jesus. And they're deciding, hey, we've kind of had the corner on this whole thing. You need to teach those Gentiles to follow the law. And they need to become Jews first and then Christians afterwards. And so Paul is saying, no, that's not the case. The Jews in Jerusalem are saying, yes, that is the case. So they come together in the Jerusalem Council in Acts 15. We talked about that probably 2 episodes ago. And they say, we need to resolve this. And so what they decide officially is you don't need to become a Jew first to become a Christian. You don't need to come under the law. You just need to believe in Jesus. Now, to our modern ears, and this will set us up for Galatians 5, which you want to talk about, to our modern ears, it's like, oh, all you got to do is believe. Awesome. Like, that's easy. But Paul's actually going to make a subtle case that it's actually not easier. It's much more difficult because you have to now live a life that's empowered by the Spirit, and you have to crucify the flesh. The law might have allowed you to kind of avoid the Spirit of God, and just live according to the law. That's why the Pharisees rejected Jesus so easily.
So as we peel back these layers, Paul's letter is very interesting because I think what he's doing is he's calling out the issue of you're not under the law anymore. So all you Gentiles who are getting led astray by these Jews who are telling you that, that's not the case. Also, all you Jews who keep saying that, that's not the case for you either. So it's like this weird, like, as you just keep peeling back the layers, it gets crazier. So then we get to like the bottom line of it is by the Spirit Jesus died, he rose again. Like now knowing that fact, now the law part is out of the way. Now we're going to dig even deeper, which leads into chapter 5, which is talking about how those works of the flesh versus the fruit of the Spirit, and how they kind of they battle against each other.
Exactly. Like Paul he's gonna catch the people that are saying, well, yeah, you can believe in Jesus, but you have to follow the law. So you have to celebrate the right things. You have to say the right things. You have to look the right things. I mean, all the way down to you have to be circumcised. Actually, Paul makes a hilarious joke. You'll see a line. There's a line in 5:12. I wish those who unsettle you would emasculate themselves. Most likely that was an innuendo saying like, they want you to cut yourselves. I wish they would cut themselves, like referring to circumcision. Like it's actually like
because circumcision back in the day was like a sign of like a mark of God's people.
Exactly.
And so making them do that to be a Christian is like, it's backwards.
So to the Jews, he's saying, hey, the Jewish Christians, I should say, he's saying, hey, we don't have to follow the law. We've been set free from the law. In fact, the law was only giving us a vision to what the promise would be.
Well,
and go ahead.
I was just going to say Galatians 15, that I underlined this because it stuck out right away. It says, what then has become of your blessedness?
Yes.
So like you've been set apart, yes, but now Jesus came and he has given you the ultimate like blessing of no longer needing the law anymore. So what's happened to that gift? You're just throwing it away and just going back to being enslaved by the law again? That doesn't even make any sense.
So on one side, he says we don't have to follow the law anymore. But on the other side, the side of the argument that would be like, we have extreme freedom, we can do whatever we want. He says, no. You need to crucify the flesh. This is difficult.
So that leads me back into what I was talking about at the beginning of the episode when I was talking about compromise. So if we indeed today are no longer under the law, but like you were saying, have this gift, this blessing through the gift of Jesus and his death and resurrection, no longer being under the law, we have to crucify the things of our passions and desires because they were crucified on the cross with Jesus. So no longer can we continue a life with these things in our lives. And I think the reason I was alluding to that at the beginning of the episode is because oftentimes I feel like today we can really compromise the things of the flesh and mask it with the things of the Spirit. And Paul like specifically calls out that they are two like completely in contrast things. This is like light and darkness. You cannot have both simultaneously. So if the gifts of the Spirit are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, against such things there is no law. I mean, first of all, before I even highlight the passions of the flesh or the works of the flesh, which would you say typically today of the Spirit gets masked over a lot of those things? Which one of those would you say? Which one would you say?
I think in a lot of ways, love has been hijacked,
yes.
And it means a lot of things it was never intended to mean.
Mm-hmm. So this is my question because of that. If we look at all the works of the flesh, sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of rage or fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, these things. Oftentimes we say, well, if people struggle with those things, you just need to love them through it. Mm-hmm. And like, I think that has been so incredibly twisted in that Paul is straight up saying, these are the gifts of the Spirit, the fruit of the Spirit. These are the desires of the flesh. They cannot coexist.
Correct. So
how can you say in our world today that all of these sins they're okay We just need to cover it with love. It doesn't work that way. It's like asking Jesus to just wallow and sit in our sin with us. That doesn't, like, that word picture is just like horrid.
It is interesting because Paul is teaching that these are two diametrically opposed concepts. You can live by the flesh or you can live by the Spirit, and one does not look like the other. What's interesting in our day and age is that Paul was trying to confront extreme lawfulness. So the thing that the Galatian believers were falling into is they were trying to follow too many laws. They were being led astray to do too many lawful things. That is not the case in our day and age. Like, new believers are not like, okay, how do I live exactly like a Christian and never mess up? That's not what we're seeing. What we're seeing in large part is people that are like, well, how can I live as much like the world as possible and still be a Christian? It's like
Christian badge,
it's flipped.
Yeah.
It's flipped. So we are not dealing with the things that the Galatian believers were believing. In a lot of cases, like you can still see elements of it, I suppose. But what we need to pay attention to is, no. Paul's actually teaching, hey, a life of the Spirit means you have crucified completely the desires of the flesh, and a Christian believer does not look like somebody who is living in the flesh. So, yeah, like, I love Galatians because it's so applicable to us no matter what season we're in. And Paul's doing a fantastic job saying, hey, this is what a life of following Christ looks like. And this is what a life of following Christ does not look like. We're not saved by our lawfulness, but we're also not saved in our sinfulness, meaning Jesus has saved us from our sin to live a life that is no longer bound by sin.
I think something that really gets to me too is that when I read this passage, or when I read just Galatians in general, I get the feeling of clarity, whereas there are so many conversations you can enter into in our world today that, like, when you ask about, well, what about homosexuality? What about this type of sin? And what about this one? And it's like, well, like, God wants you to do this, but, like, we will walk through you. We'll walk through this with you, and we'll like people are afraid to touch it. And to me, when I walk away from those conversations, I'm like, but what's the final answer?
Why?
Like, there isn't one. So when I read this and it says, and those who belong to Christ, that means anyone who calls himself a Christian that, like, falls under, like, I have been saved by his grace, they have crucified. That means put to complete death. There is no lingering. Like, it is dead. They put those desires of the flesh with its passions and its desires, they've crucified it. So it no longer is a part of who they are. Quotes.
So, a necessary part of this conversation then is, if you look in chapter 6, brothers, if anyone, this is verse 1, brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. So you might be listening and thinking, like, well, how would it be possible to live a life with no sin? That's not exactly what Paul's teaching. Paul's not teaching that you come to faith in Christ and you're immediately perfect, because if that was the case, he wouldn't say in chapter 6, hey, if you find somebody in a transgression, you should restore them in a spirit of gentleness. Keep watch on yourself, picking up the verse, lest you too be tempted. Bear one another burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. So he is saying, like, hey, if you catch someone in sin, you need to call that out and make sure that that person is restored to a life of the Spirit, not a life of the flesh. So it's not like a, hey, you must be perfect, but you must live a life that honors Christ more and more day in and day out. There is not an idea in the New Testament of a continually purposeful sinning Christian. That doesn't exist. The idea is, yeah, you're going to struggle, but the body of believers is going to help you to end that struggle, to crucify those desires of the flesh.
Well, and that same verse in 6:1, keep watch on yourself lest you too be tempted. There's also that I don't know, it kind of pokes at, like, no one is perfect.
Yes.
So in helping your brother, don't you dare, like, get yourself into a place where you are also tempted to go back to those things that may take hold of you. So as we think about your part today, I know, myself included, we all have sins that will hold us back. And I would say today, just take some time to consider the things that maybe are holding you back, those things that are keeping you from, like, crucifying your desires and your passions to the cross that God so graciously sent his son to pay for. And as believers in Christ, like, ask God to just open your eyes to the things that may be holding you back, or sins that are passions and desires that are keeping you from him. And just remember that like you cannot be in both. You can't simultaneously live in both of those places and call yourself a follower of Christ if you're not willing to let go of the sins that are holding you from his right relationship with you. So just take some time, talk to the Lord about that today. Hopefully he will open your eyes to things that you need to just give over to him, and just continue to pursue your relationship with him today. All right. Well, thanks for joining us today. We'll be back again tomorrow.
Thanks so much for listening to God's Plan, Your Part. If anything stuck out to you, if you have any questions, or if you'd like to receive a Bible, you can email us at godsplanyourpart@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the podcast, please consider supporting us through the link in our description. We love that you're on this journey with us, and we hope you have a great day. See you tomorrow.